Maybe you've noticed it too. There are videos, podcasts, and articles telling you stop setting goals. And maybe the idea is really appealing to you that you can be successful even if you don't have goals. And I think maybe more so if you're someone who's been let down in the past. But what if what they're actually proposing is just a different type of goals? And if you look at your goals differently, it's really achieving the same thing. So maybe instead of ditching goals altogether, start to recognize how types of goals are different and understand the role that each type plays in your success and going after what you want. And so today I'm going to talk about the three different types of goals, how they're all connected, and how I've been using them to workshop my goals and what I want to accomplish. Speaking of that, today I'm going to share my latest momentum experiment, and it has to do with social media, which has not always been easy for me. So I'll get into that at the end of the episode. Before I get into specific goal types, I first want to talk about attention. And I've mentioned this before in past content, but if you haven't heard about different types of attention, then I'd love to recommend Stand Out of Our Light. It's by James Williams. I'll have the link in the show notes. This book talks about three different types, and I want to explain them because they're related to goals and to goal setting. So let's take a look at if you're watching the video, you're going to see some slides. If you're listening to audio, I'm going to walk you through them. So the first type of attention is what he calls spotlight attention. That's where you are paying attention in the moment to the thing you are actually doing. So this could be right now, I am recording this podcast live and my attention is it's spotlight. I am focused on this one thing I'm doing directly in front of me. The next type of attention is what he calls starlight attention. And this is more about being in alignment with the person you want to be. Are the actions you're taking day after day actually aligned with the decisions that you want to be making and who you want to be? And then the third type of attention is really this capacity to step back and look at the bigger picture of, okay, who do I want to be? How do I know who I want to be? How do I know what's important to me? And it's really reflective attention. So you are looking at the big picture, you're thinking about what matters to you. I love this framework. And one of the other ways you can think about it is that spotlight is doing, starlight is being, and daylight is about knowing. Now, I bring this up because when it comes to goal setting, I think it's really important to recognize that daylight attention takes time and space. We need to actually step away. And so often when you think about goals, you might sit down and have a goal setting session, or maybe you work with someone, or perhaps even attend a workshop. But the point is, you need to step away from your day to day. You need to step away from the spotlight in order to say, what do I really want? How do I know what is important to me? So when it comes to these three, you actually start with the daylight attention, knowing what you want, and then you work backwards and decide, okay, and so what does that mean for who I want to be and what is in alignment? And then break it down to just the doing. How am I showing up day to day? I think is really important. So now I want to pivot to goals, where we got this idea of attention, and daylight attention is really important for deciding what we want. Let's imagine that there is an athlete, and an athlete decides, you know what, I want to be the best in my field, and I want maybe a gold medal. We can all imagine there are athletes who compete and they want to be on the top of the podium. And they kind of say, that's the destination that I want to go to, and you need to have a path that is going to get you there. So you'll have this direction of, okay, I need to take these little steps in order to reach my goal. That's how most of us think of goal setting. It's that there's an outcome that I want to reach, and it might take some time, it's going to take some work, but that's eventually where I want to get. Now you need to work backwards and fill out what are the actual things I need to do. Now, in a way, if we look at attention, you take that daylight attention to decide what's important to you. Where do you want to go? What's the destination? But you also have to look at your starlight attention regularly. If am I on the right path? Am I following the path that's in alignment with where I want to be going? And really, that's the direction. And ultimately, you need to take daily action to get there. And I think what's happening is when people think about goals, they start to mix up what types of goals there are. So let's get into the types of goals that exist. And I want you to think about an X and Y axis. So if you're looking at a graph, which in the video, I do have a video here, but I'll try and explain it if you're listening on audio. The bottom of the graph is time. Whenever we start out to set a goal, we're starting from where we are and to where we want to get eventually, that destination. So there's going to be time along the bottom axis there. But then on the y-axis, this is where I like to think about your goals in respect to control and the amount of control you have over the situation. Now, in this case, on the y-axis, more control is at the bottom, closer to where you are right now. And as you get further up, that's where you start to have less control. Now, if we take the example of a gold medal, you have control over what you do, but you cannot have control over the other people you're competing against. And so when it comes to goals, let's map the idea of an outcome goal. So this is where most of us think about goal setting is we'll say, what's the outcome we want to achieve? So the gold medal is a good example of that. The next kind of goal would be a performance goal. This is where it's about your personal performance. So the outcome goal you have the least control over. It's also the furthest away. The performance goal you have more control over, although not immediate control because it takes time to get there. And there are probably some other factors you won't know about from today, but it is a little bit more intermediate. So this is kind of in the middle. And then finally, you have your process goal, which is actually the most immediate thing, and you have the most control. And it's sort of where your starting point is. And the process goal is all about the daily action. What do you do next in order to start walking along that path in the direction towards the outcome you want? And I think a lot of the advice is really just saying, focus on systems and process and stop looking at that outcome goal. But I think they actually all work together really well. Now, another way you can think about this, if we label the idea of an outcome goal as the destination you'd like to end up with, you just can't necessarily guarantee you'll end up there. The next is the direction. The performance goal is the direction you're moving in. These are looking at signs that you are getting better, you are improving. And then finally, the process goal is saying, what are these daily actions that I am going to take and I could start taking immediately? And you have the most control of them. What's something I can do today? What's something I could do tomorrow? The other thing that's really nice about the process goal and this daily action is that you can succeed so quickly. And let's look at a couple of examples for this. So first, we'll look at the athlete, or we'll think about the athlete. So the destination, that outcome goal, win a gold. Now, the direction they need to move in is this personal best. So their performance goal might be to hit some new personal best targets, to get faster or more efficient. It really depends on what sport you're playing. But the daily action is showing up and following your training program. And at the end of the day, when you complete your training program workout, check, you've accomplished your goal. You get those small wins over and over and over again. And you know exactly what you're supposed to do so that you get better, you move along that direction, and that maybe you'll reach that destination, but there's a lot of factors outside of your control. And if we take a look at another one, which is maybe writing a book, maybe your destination, that outcome is that you would love to be a best-selling author. You don't have full control over that. You don't know what is going to be released. You don't know how it's going to be received, but maybe you focus your energy on your performance goal, which is to write a book, publish a book. That is much more within your control. And that's also the direction that you need to go anyway if you are eventually wanting to be a best-selling author. Now, that might be publish a book, might be your performance goal. It could be write the best book I can write on this subject. Really, there are lots of ways you can think about performance, but it's all about measuring yourself against an earlier version of yourself. And then the process goal, this is that daily action. What do I have to do to get there? How do I make sure I start walking that path right away and repeat that over and over? So that process goal is that daily action. It's repeatable and it's also effective to get you along that path closer. And another example, maybe you're at work and your ultimate outcome goal, you want a promotion at work. That's not fully in your control. You don't know what other candidates are out there. You don't know what they're looking for and if you'll be a fit. But your performance goal or the direction you want to move might be your annual review. You want to make sure that you are getting a really good rating from your boss. And how do I do that? Through daily actions like documenting your key performance indicators. Maybe you have a weekly or monthly check-in with your supervisor so they're on top of knowing what you're working on and how well things are going and how you're driving forward the outcomes at work. So there are three different examples, but you can start to get a feel for how this can look. And when it comes to this advice, I just want to zero in on the fact that I see a lot of content out there around stop setting goals. And I think what's happening is that if we think about the outcome goal, because it's the least in our control, and it is one of those things where when we miss the mark, we might completely negate all of the work we've done, how far we've come along the path, that we've been moving in the direction. But because we didn't hit the destination, somehow that means that we have failed. And that can be so dispiriting, that can really get you down. And I personally think that you do want to focus on the performance goal and also the daily action, really zeroing in on the direction you want to be walking. Because when you know the direction you want to go and you think about, okay, what does that mean for me? How will I know if I'm getting better? How will I know if I'm making improvements? And being able to describe in detail, what does it look like if I'm reaching my performance goal or if I'm along the path of my performance goal? And then those daily actions are even more concrete of if I do these things, they're going to move me closer to my performance goal. But I don't think you should completely get rid of the idea of an outcome goal. I think you just need to frame it differently. So, in an example where I'll use a very common one for people is if they want to lose weight and their outcome goal, they measure all their success against the outcome goal. If they don't see the number on the scale they want, suddenly it feels like they failed, even though maybe they've been cooking meals at home, moving their body more, feeling better in their clothing. But when they walk on that scale, all of a sudden it just undoes everything. And so I could see why we want to very loosely hold. And personally, what I would like to see from people is this idea that you're honest about the direction you want to go. And I think it's honest to sometimes have that outcome goal. If you say don't set outcome goals, I think people work around it. Maybe you say, okay, well, I'll focus more on performance, but you still need to know the direction you're going. And I think typically we as humans will have an objective, a place we want to actually get to. And if we have the proper perspective that at the end of the day, the destination is not the most important goal, it's more of an that North Star or that starlight of saying, that's the direction I want to go in. So I'm going to focus on my performance of what it would take to get there, but don't attach value of whether I'm worth it or not, depending on if I ever get to that final destination or not. When we then focus more on the performance, what does it look like for me to show up the best version of myself and to stay on this path and work towards this and not hold on so tightly to that outcome? I think that's really important. But to just tell people don't even have an outcome goal, I think might be a little bit disingenuous because we just naturally think of things that we want to achieve. And I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting to achieve them as long as we have the perspective. And if we can do regular check ins to say, well, first of all, am I following the process goal? Am I taking daily consistent action? And is it moving me further along this direction that I want to be going? And that direction, that's that performance goal. Am I getting better relative to myself? So that later, when we look back, we can celebrate how far we've come from those performance goals without getting hung up on whether or not we landed in the exact place. And oftentimes, when people are making progress on moving forward and they're doing something consistently, which is amazing, and you should feel good about yourself, being able to focus in and look at your goals through that lens of saying, am I a better version of myself today than I was when I started this? That's amazing. And it's hard to take that away from someone, but sometimes we hold so much power in those outcome goals that we do let it erase how far we've come. And sometimes we end up somewhere else, and it might even be a better place that we end up. So I think loosening our grip on the outcome, focusing more on the performance. That being said, when it comes to goal setting, where do you start? And I do think it usually starts with identifying, do you have a destination in mind? What is the direction I want to go? And that's completely okay. Then you work backwards and say, all right, so if that's the direction I want to, or that's the destination, what's the direction I need to move? What does the path look like? and what are those daily actions I need to do in order to get there. And that's where we can zero in on what's my process goal. And when I say process goal, because you might say, well, that's just the method that you use or the plan that you use. I actually think if a goal is I'm going to write 500 words a day, you can actually check off and say, I've accomplished my goal for today. I've accomplished my goal for the week. If I want to cook at home more, saying, wow, I cooked 5 meals at home this week. That's better. That was my goal and I've done it. It is easier to track and kind of stack up those wins, even though you won't necessarily notice right away the performance, but they start to stack on top of each other. Speaking of, I wanted to share some daily actions that I'll be taking with my experiment. So, on this podcast, I intend to share current or active experiments that I'm going through. And one of the experiments I'm zeroing in on, especially over the month of September, but it's going to be for a while, probably at least the next year, is around social media short form content, in particular, Instagram. Now, I've been on Instagram for a number of years. I believe I started posting in earnest in 2018, maybe 2017. But during the pandemic, when I switched my focus and I started teaching about virtual presenting, I didn't know how to translate what I was teaching on YouTube to short form content. And I just kind of stopped. And you know what? At the time, I thought, this is fine. I'm getting traction over here on YouTube, and that is fine with me. I don't really know how to make short form content about this. And there was also some other stuff which I will share over the coming weeks around some baggage and mindset garbage that I have in my head around whether or not I'm good at social media. And I'm going to be exploring that over the coming weeks. But to start, given that we're talking about goals today, I wanted to share why I'm focusing on this. And in order to share my goals for Instagram and short form content, I first need to share that some of my two big goals professionally is that I want to really earn most of my living as a speaker. I love speaking. That's not a surprise to anyone. And I want to do more of it. And so, in order to do that, I need to get out there. I need to start building relationships. I need to start, going and doing more talks and having conversations, etc. And what helps a speaker is when you do have an existing audience. Similarly, another goal of mine is I do intend to write a book about the momentum formula. And when you are doing research on books and publishing, it doesn't hurt to have a presence on social media as well. Neither of those things require it, but the fact I want to get my message out there, I want to teach, I want to share, I want people to discover this podcast. And using short form content, using social media is a discovery platform. So it supports some of my other professional goals, but it's also a way for me to teach and get in front of people. But I haven't really been using it for a number of years now. So this does feel like new territory. So over the next few weeks, I'm going to share about how I'm using the formula for my method, for my mode, and also for my mindset. But just this week, I want to share around the goals. Now, as far as the 3 types of goals, I almost don't want to say it out loud, but when I really think what would be a destination that I would like to land, I would like to be able to have an audience or grow an audience on social media and on Instagram that's over 100,000. I'm currently, as I record this today, at 1,400. So there's a very long way to go. And sometimes when we say those outcome goals out loud, it feels so far away, it can be demoralizing. But that's where you focus on the performance goal. And my performance goal is to make engaging, helpful content that is giving people insight and it's helping them discover other content that I have. And when I put it out there, people are engaging. And so as I continue to practice putting out content regularly, I want it to get better, have higher quality content, figure out what works for people so that I can be proud of how far I've come with my content, and that the goal is to be using it to be helpful and offer insights and offer value. I also want, as a professional tool, to have people come and find the podcast or figure out what I'm doing, or maybe if I'm speaking somewhere. So it is part of the business, but my performance goal is just really about showing up as the best version as I can. And if I look back, I can see how far I've come. Now, from that process goal, it's about making regular short form content on Instagram, which I have not been doing. And next week, I'm going to share a little bit more about the method and how I'm using my framework to come up with the method. But first, I thought in order to understand how I am using the formula, you got to figure out the what and the why. What do I actually want to do? Where do I want to go? And why am I doing that? And I'm actively working on this. This is brand new. If you, as of recording today, see my account, there are very few posts on there, and so I'm planning to change that. And you can kind of join along and see see how it's going in real time if you are following along. But that is my experiment. We're going to circle back, and I hope that the perspective on the goals today and looking at them from the destination, direction, and daily action, or you could say outcome goals, performance goals, and process goals, is giving you a new lens to think about. And I really encourage you, you can use outcome goals, but don't hold on to them really tight. Really zero in on the performance, where you want to be the better version of yourself, and then zero in on just having those process goals of saying, yes, I took action again, I took action again. And that is going to help you to build and keep your momentum.